Hello, nice of you to tune in. Here I will introduce to you the switchable plasmonic phase change material indium-3 antimon-1 telluride-2 as a new programmable nanophotonics material platform for the infrared. Before we start, I just want to thank all of my collaborators from the University RWTH Aachen and University of Bonn. I want to mention that the following results are summarized in a manuscript which is currently in submission. It has already been shown that one can optically write dielectric metasurfaces with a focused pulsed laser directly into a thin phase change material film. So Wang and Sheludev and their collaborators have used this to write diffractive holograms and dielectric resonators of wavelength size for the visible and near infrared spectral range. We work in the infrared spectral range in our group, so we have combined a polar crystal substrate with a thin film of phase change material to write surface phonon polariton resonators, which are deeply sub-wavelength size. We've also shown in our group that one can optically switch individual meta-atoms, and then one can not only switch the phase from fully amorphous to fully crystalline, but also to intermediate states applied to dielectric antennas. This enabled us to switch the phase of the transmitted light from 0 to almost 2 pi. And we use this to make a programmable dielectric Huygens metasurface. Applied to metallic antennas, this local switching enables one to control the size and position of the crystallized phase change material volume, which then allows for control over the antenna resonance of each individual antenna. We could tune the resonances by more than one full width half max of each antenna. So how does this antenna tuning actually work? Let's first look at phase change materials briefly. So they have been used already in non-volatile data storage, and they have at least 2 stable phases, an amorphous and a crystalline one, which differ greatly in their optical properties. Between these phases, they can be switched reversibly. If we look at an antenna of length L now, surrounded by a refractive index medium N, we know that its resonance wavelength will be roughly proportional to N and L. And a previous colleague of mine, Ann-Kathrin Michel, used this now for antenna resonance tuning. So by combining antenna arrays with different phase change materials, she could switch their resonance wavelength. In the case of GST here, we have an increase of the wavelength when we change from amorphous to crystalline GST because the refractive index increases. In the case of indium antimony, the refractive index decreases, so we get a decrease in the resonance wavelength. Here the tuning of the antenna resonance was performed by changing the dielectric environment. Now we asked ourselves if it's also possible to access this other quantity, that L, the length of the antenna, with the phase change material. And because of this, we were looking for plasmonic phase change materials, and actually Golipur and Sheludev already found that GST becomes plasmonic in the visible spectral range. You see here the dielectric function, the real part of the crystalline phase becomes negative. But we wanted to work in the infrared spectral range, so we had to look for a different material, and we found indium-3 antimony-1 telluride-2, or IST. If we compare its optical properties, here the real part of the permittivity with that of GST, we see that in the amorphous phase, they're actually pretty similar. Only once we crystallize, we see a significant difference because IST has a negative permittivity, which follows a Drude-like behavior. So we can switch IST from dielectric to metallic or plasmonic in the infrared spectral range. And this enables us now to write plasmonic nanostructures directly into a thin film of IST, because IST is a switchable infrared plasmonic material. And we wanted to verify this now by writing and erasing plasmonic antennas. And we have a very simple layer stack here. And we see in the light microscopy image the written and the erased antennas. And in the infrared response, we see for the written antennas a very nice resonance, the relative transmittance, which is then gone for the erased antennas. If we trace now this transmittance in the resonance over several write and erase cycles, you see that we always go back and forth between approximately 60 and 100% of transmittance. So this switching at the meta-atom level now provides us with the basics for optical programming. But we wanted to go one step further. We wanted to modify already written antennas to create this tuning of the antenna resonances. And for this, we had to do sub-meta-atom level modifications. So look at such an antenna here, like before. We have a nice resonance. And now what we can do is focus a switching laser pulse at the tip of the antennas and make them grow in that direction, and thus elongate them. And these longer antennas now come together also as expected with larger resonance wavelengths. We can do the reverse as well. We can make them shorter again by targeting the tips with a reomorphizing laser pulse. We see here that then corresponding to the decrease in antenna length, also the resonance wavelength decreases again. If we compare the final to the initial antennas, we see that the final ones are much smaller. So by combining crystallizing and amorphizing laser pulses, one can actually do switching below the diffraction limit of the switching laser. Applying the modification of already written antennas a little bit differently, we can also, for example, divide these long rod antennas with a reomorphizing pulse in their center to make these dimer antennas. Or a bit more complex, we can use multiple crystallization pulses with an amorphizing pulse and make such a U shape here, or also called split ring resonator. So before we could only access the refractive index N of the dielectric surrounding to tune the antennas with the phase change material, but now we can actually tune them by changing their sizes and shapes themselves. So last but not least, I want to show you how to use IST together with pre-patterned metasurfaces. There arise several interesting applications, for example, nanoscale screening. Here we see an antenna array of slit antennas covered with a thin layer of IST. And in the spectral response, here the red curve, we see a very nice resonance of these slits. But once we crystallize the IST above the slits, as seen in this image, the light cannot pass through anymore to the slits and there is no resonance anymore. Only once we reamorphize the IST, the light can pass through again and we restore our resonance. So with this, we can actually turn off and on any individual antenna in an IST-coated metasurface. And another application would be nanoscale soldering. Here we see a cross-section, a dimer antenna with a IST patch in its gap. And here we see it as an AFM image. And the idea now is that while the IST is amorphous, it's dielectric, so we have a dimer with a dielectric loaded gap. But once we crystallize the IST, we connect the two antennas with one another and make one long rod antenna. And we see in the spectral response actually that the resonance wavelength increases as expected. So we go from the shorter antennas in the dimer to the long antennas in the long rod antenna. With this, we can now adapt meta-atoms by strategically placing IST patches in or on them. Now, let me conclude. I've introduced to you IST for infrared nanophotonics. IST is very interesting because in the infrared, it changes its optical behavior from dielectric to metallic. We've used this to write and erase plasmonic antennas and also to modify them after they were written, which we showed by tuning the antenna resonances, by creating more complex antenna structures like, for example, split rings. Showed you that we can do nanoscale screening where we can turn off and on arbitrary antennas in an IST-coated metasurface. We can even connect or solder together different plasmonic elements in a metasurface. Finally, what I didn't have time here to show you is that you can also make a frequency selective near perfect absorber where you can tune the absorption wavelength through the whole mid-infrared range. At the end of my talk now, I hope you're as excited about IST for infrared nanophotonics as I am. Goodbye.